Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Astro Consciousness channel. I'm Millie, and I am here to talk to you about the Libra Equinox taking place on Sunday, September 22nd. In this channel, we talk about the astrological energy of the week ahead and how you can integrate it into your personal and spiritual growth. Let's talk about the equinox. And let's see how this is being integrated into the eclipse season. Now, I don't normally do this. I don't usually do this, but I'm actually going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can look at the chart together. And the reason for that is that there are a ton of aspects, and I think that they are all very important. And I want to make sure that I don't miss any of them. So with that said, let's get started. So at the moment of an equinox or a solstice, we are activating the Aries points of the zodiac. The Aries points of the zodiac are the 0 degrees of the cardinal signs of the zodiac, which indicate a new season starting, right? So when we have a spring equinox is the 0 degrees of Aries. When we have a Cancer or summer solstice, it's the 0 degrees of Cancer. When we have a Libra or fall equinox, and of course, I'm talking mostly here about the Northern Hemisphere. Either way, there is a shift in seasons, and I'm not necessarily just talking about stations, like weather stations. I'm talking about the energetic change that we feel collectively, right? So when we get to the Libra equinox, it's the 0 degree of Libra, which we're going to talk about in a second. And when we get to the Capricorn solstice, it's the 0 degree of Capricorn. If we were to look at things from season to season, we would actually be much more aligned with the overall energy that is there, in fact, to support us. So as we look at this 0 degrees of Libra, we have to take note that this chart is a snapshot of the next 3 months. It's a snapshot of the Libra equinox taking place on September 22nd to the Capricorn solstice, which takes place on December 21st. This chart shows us the overall themes that we're going to be working through, integrating, processing, and noticing the change of, in addition to everything that may be happening week to week. But this is the umbrella energy, okay? So here we have the sun at 0 degrees Libra. Here we have the beginning of the understanding of balance and harmony and how those themes play a role in our lives, how we're meant to integrate that in our lives over the next 3 months. Is there a focus on relationships? I think that much more than there being a focus on personal relationships, which obviously play a big role, I think that there is much more of an emphasis on the relationship that we have to life, the relationship that we have to money, to our work, to joy, to children, to intimate relationships, to community. So this is about finding the balance and the harmony in that. But the definition of balance and harmony has been transforming for quite some time, and I'll get into why in a second. And so the next 3 months are much more about, for instance, something as simple as work-life balance. It's so interesting how over the last couple of weeks, as I've, scrolled through Instagram, I have come across several reels of certain people, certain experts, certain pages talking about there is no such thing as work-life balance. There is no such thing as work-life balance. If that's what you're looking for, then you're either being delusional or you're trying to make something work that isn't going to work. And from my perspective is I think everyone gets to choose what that means to them. So it isn't so much about saying there is no such thing as work-life balance, because I think that to say that, to have such a hard yes or no around it means that there are parameters, means that there is a rigidity, means that there is a specific definition. And it's almost like a one size fits all definition. And I don't think that that's where we're headed. And from an astrological lens, I think that is a very individual perspective that people are going to have about their own lives. So work-life balance is really dependent on what individuals think that is for them, right? And so if for someone, if they prioritize their work and give a certain amount of energy, give a certain amount of time to their personal life, maybe that is a work-life balance to them, because what we're talking about here is something that is harmonious to you, right? Something that is harmonious to your relationship to yourself, and the relationship to your life. So when we look at the sun at 0 degrees Libra, right next to the South Node in Libra, we are talking about a much more refined definition of not just the types of personal relationships that you want to have, and being a lot more clear about certain patterns that you don't want to repeat in personal relationships, but what is the relationship to yourself? What brings you a sense of balance and harmony within yourself? Now, we're not seeking perfection. We're not seeking balance to where everything is exactly to where it's meant to be. But I think that a great indicator of whether our life is in harmony and in balance to us is how our body feels, how our nervous system responds to life in general. And if there is an imbalance, I think our bodies are going to make it very clear to what we are not prioritizing in our life, which creates some kind of alleviation, which creates some kind of release, right? And so whatever that means to you, whether it's meditation, movement, spending time with friends, spending more time in your personal life and less time at work, whatever that is, again, it's very personal. Pluto retrograde in Capricorn for the very last time at 29 degrees is the attempt to hold on to certain ways of being, certain ways of living, certain ways of defining the way that we live in this world, trying to hold on to them, or trying to have a very clear-cut definition of what that means to everyone. And that's just not going to work, because we're moving into Pluto in Aquarius, and Aquarius is the sign that says everyone has a very unique experience. Now, here we have a Sun South Node conjunction in the sign of Libra at the time of the equinox, which is also a signature of the upcoming solar eclipse in Libra that we're going to have on October 2nd. The closeness of the Sun and the South Node, to me, as I mentioned a few moments ago, is just a much clearer definition of what is in harmony, in value, to you, the relationship that you have to yourself, to others, to money, to your work, to your workplace, to your home, to your friends, to your community. Because the sun represents our identity, our ego, our vitality, how we show up in the world, who we are, the relationship to ourself, relationship Libra to ourself, to our identity, to our ego, to the way that we have shown up to life. South Node in Libra, something has significantly changed about that. Something has significantly transformed, and perhaps with that transformation of the understanding of ourselves and how we want to show up to life, significant changes have come to our lives, like a change in income, a change in career, a change in family dynamic, a change in the basis and foundations of our lives, whether we chose to have those changes or not. And to me, this is really interesting because it shows a few things. I think one, it shows the power of the South Node. The power of the South Node is to clear and to cleanse something that is essentially in our way of a more pure expression of our soul, a much clearer connection to ourself with a capital S. I also think that it's really important that the South Node there really shows us that inevitably, any changes that have been taking place inward will always manifest outward. Any desires, any thoughts, any dreams, any wishes that we have had far before July of 2023 are now manifesting themselves or have manifested themselves in the last year. And the relationship to that part of our life, with the South Node there in Libra, we have had to let go of a lot of ways that have felt very familiar in relationship and implement a new way of relating to that. This is a big deal because I cannot imagine, I mean, I don't even have to imagine, like, as a Libra ascendant, my relationships have changed a lot. I have had difficult conversations that I probably would have never had before because there is an internal calling. There is something about my soul's expression that wants to be a much more genuine and honest to myself. And so when we don't express that, when we don't honor that, we move into the lower expression of Libra, which is self-abandonment. Now let's look at what the ruler of Libra is doing. The ruler of Libra is Venus, and Venus is in his home sign of Libra. Venus in Libra is truly much more genuine expression of my life doesn't look that way anymore. My relationships don't look that way anymore. I don't necessarily feel the same way in my relationships anymore. And that doesn't have to be good or bad. It's just the understanding that you have changed and therefore relationships feel differently. You're playing a different role. And the square that it creates to Pluto in Capricorn. Much more than this just being about a week or the weekend of September 21st and 22nd, this is about the understanding of how much our relationships have been purified, if you will, stripped of any deceit, brought to the spotlight as to where they are ingenuous, right? And from that, having much more honest relationships, really, since Pluto has come into Capricorn, which was back in 2008. Now, that's a really long time, right? And of course, our relationships have shifted from 2008 to now. But what this is showing us, what this last square is showing us, is when you think back to the trajectory of your relationships and how they were back in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, and so on and so forth. How are they now? Who are you now in relationship to yourself versus then? Now, I think that a lot of people can say, well, of course they've changed because I've changed, because people change over time. I think that's fair to say if you are someone who is on a path of self-awareness, on a path of growth, on a path of really wanting to do things differently. But let me tell you, that doesn't mean that everyone has been on that path. So when you look at this season, this eclipse season, not just the equinox, and not just the week leading up to the equinox, but when you look at the eclipse season and you realize the significant changes in your personal relationships and the relationship to your life in general and the relationship to yourself, think about how some of the people around you might still be behaving in the way that they were behaving back in 2008. It's mind-blowing when you think about it. It's a little bizarre, but that is what this particular square is showing you. It's the last one between a Venus and Libra and a Pluto and Capricorn. And so what that does overall is that it emphasizes it so much that you really have to make decisions around the patterns, the energies in relationships that you're taking with you once Pluto really moves into Aquarius. And things are vastly different. Okay, so let's look at the fact that Venus is also creating an inconjunction to Neptune in Pisces. And the inconjunction to Neptune in Pisces can be rose-colored glasses or denial, right? Denial of, no, but maybe that will change. No, but I have, I have this hope. And I think that we all have that in some way, shape, or form, because to let go of something that Pluto is highlighting is very, very, very difficult. We're talking about something deeply rooted here. And in Capricorn, this isn't just something that, because Capricorn represents so much legacy and the way that things have been done, we are talking about unlearning something that was passed down from a previous generation. And that is difficult. The reason that I stress that is because it is. You really are going through a massive transformation. And if it feels the way it does, I only want to normalize it here. Now, the inconjunction between Neptune and Pisces and Venus and Libra might have us leaning towards, you know what, I'm just going to let things play out. And it might have some people saying, it'll work itself out. I'm not gonna deal with it. Everything will fall as it may. With Capricorn there, with Pluto and Capricorn there, a decision has to be made. Conversations need to be had. Now, the flip side to the inconjunction is complete surrender to the fact that this is difficult and that you may not know what's on the other side of that difficult decision or that difficult conversation with an important relationship in your life. If I say this, I know for a fact that things will not be the same on the other side. If I make this decision, I know that things will not be the same on the other side. And so the inconjunction to Neptune in Pisces is the not knowing. And the highest expression of integrating Neptune in Pisces is I surrender to where this takes me, because I understand that when I honor myself and I give someone else their responsibility back to them and I let them have their lessons, I can trust that everything will unfold for the highest good. Because with the South Node transiting Libra since July of 2023, one of the greatest lessons in relationships has been that when we give the people that we love the responsibility of their lessons, of their life back, we are actually showing them love, because we are not interfering in the unfolding of the lessons that they came to have in this lifetime. And that can be difficult, because if we are used to playing the role of the fixer, of the mediator, of the reliable one, not only does it bring up something in us of, if I don't play that role and if I'm not that, then who am I? Which is, I think, is very valid, and it's important, and it's an important role to look at. But why do we feel that we need to do that for others time and time and time again? And when we do, does it really change anything in the long run? So these are very fundamental ways of relating that have been passed down to us that I think are very much indicative of Pluto and Capricorn in the way that that's ending. And the inconjunction to Neptune and Pisces is a discomfort, a not knowing who we are, Neptune and Pisces in relationships, Venus and Libra, when we no longer play that role. Big, big, big. Okay. So let's look at a few configurations that I think are extremely important. The first configuration that we want to look at, which I have talked about, is Pluto retrograde in Capricorn, creating a trine to Uranus retrograde in Taurus, trine Mercury in Virgo, right? And so here we have a grand Earth trine. But it's almost impossible to look at that grand Earth trine without noticing the fact that there is a sextile between Uranus retrograde in Taurus Neptune retrograde in Pisces, and then a sextile between Neptune retrograde in Pisces and Pluto retrograde in Taurus. This creates a configuration of a kite. So when we look at the connection between Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, these are the big guys. These big guys in the zodiac, in the cosmos, represent ongoings, societal ongoings that we have absolutely no control over, right? So Uranus and Taurus is the understanding we have no control over inflation. We have no control over what the market does. We have no control over the prices of homes, the prices of rent. Pluto in Capricorn, I think it's the demise of capitalism, right? And we have no control over that. I think that there are people who are trying to have some control over that, because I think that there is a sense of safety in that. And this isn't, again, none of this is coming from a place of good and bad for me here. It's almost irrelevant to look at it from that perspective when the astrology is showing us what it's showing us, and the change is inevitable, right? And the Neptune in Pisces is, there is a delusion that we have been living under that is dissolving. And there is a disappointment with that. And perhaps there is a fear that can feel overwhelming with that. But here's the thing. All of these three major planets are actually working together, because Uranus is at a trine to Pluto, right? So what does that sound like, and what does that look like in more practical terms? Uranus and Taurus, at the moment, as human beings, we cannot control inflation. We cannot control the cost of groceries, the cost of rent, the cost of homes, the cost of land, right? And capitalism, in the way that it's been trying to get back on its feet since 2020, we have no control over that as individuals. And yet, Uranus and Pluto are at a trine to one another. To me, a trine is, this is an energy that is easeful and that is happening no matter what. So where we have trines in our natal charts, for instance, those are the parts of us that are expressed very easily or very easefully without us even knowing. That's what's happening here. The inflation, the transformation or the demise of capitalism, all of that is inevitable. And the trine tells us this is happening very easefully. Does it necessarily feel easeful? No, it doesn't, right? Because we can all feel the weight of the cost of groceries, the cost of mortgage, the cost of rent, the cost of gas. And Taurus represents all of those very, air quotes, simple things that we move through day to day. Now, and I want to make that clear, because trines aren't always necessarily about good or bad. They are just about the ease of the expression, right? And so both Uranus and Pluto are creating sextiles to Neptune and Pisces. To me, in my forever optimistic outlook on life, is I'm leaning on Neptune and Pisces, which is I am giving my anxieties to a higher power. I'm not necessarily putting on rose-colored glasses and saying that this isn't happening, because there is no way that I can do that when I do have to manage my money differently. Neptune and Pisces, to me, is there's something significant coming to an end, and I trust the unfolding. It may be uncomfortable because all of these external powers feel so much greater than me. And when I remember that when I get in touch with soul, with source, with spirit within me, I am guided, I am supported, and I can only take things one day at a time. So where does that perspective of one day at a time come? Mercury and Virgo. Mercury and Virgo energy over the last several weeks has been that ongoing reminder. How are you showing up day to day? How are you managing your daily responsibilities? When you take stock of life, what really matters, right? In terms of energy, output, effort, money. Mercury in Virgo is about really looking at the details of our life and understanding that there are greater things happening. There is a great shift in consciousness that is taking place that looks like a change in, finances and the cost of things, and perhaps the way that we were taught that our lives were going to turn out if we did things in a particularly linear way. We realize, oh, that's not working. I keep trying to do it that way and it doesn't work. That probably means it's not going to work that way. Mercury in Virgo is about, okay, so when I focus on my day-to-day, when I focus on my health, when I focus on my routines, when I focus on my well-being, on my mental health, on the things that have to do with me as an individual, the whole world can be going through a significant change, and I'm still responsible for myself. I usually talk about astrology in a much more personal way, but the reason that I'm talking about the bigger transits that are happening here is because they are affecting us. And notice how Uranus is in Taurus, an earth sign, Pluto is in Capricorn, an earth sign. Anything that is an earth, it's about the material world. So we feel it, we experience it. And when it's these big outer planets, well, we have no control over it. But Mercury is very much a personal planet, and it is a planet that we use every single day. And Mercury is the planet, not just of communication in the way that we think, but it is about our perception of things. How are we perceiving that which is happening around us? And are we leaning towards a higher expression of Virgo or the lower expression of Virgo? The lower expression of Virgo it's about the critical mind that is almost irrelevant right now, because we are where we are and we need to face where we are. A higher expression of Mercury and Virgo is, okay, based on what my life is showing me, how do I need to organize myself and still understand that things are going to work out, and still understand that there are certain things, that there are certain steps that I need to take, and really taking ownership of that. Wherever Earth is involved, we have to really land and be very practical about how we're moving forward, right? And so here's the thing. Mercury in Virgo is creating an opposition, a pretty wide opposition, but it's still an opposition to Neptune in Pisces. Neptune in Pisces can be the ignoring of that. And really, anytime we have an opposition between two planets, it is about finding the middle ground. And the middle ground of this is when I show up, Mercury in Virgo, in a very logical way, when I really look at what's being shown to me, Spirit will help me. Neptune in Pisces. Spirit, it's like Spirit, the universe, it wants to meet me halfway. I give my anxiety to a higher power and trust that when I show up day to day, that inevitably creates a momentum that will eventually manifest in my external reality, as our external reality as a collective is also shifting. Now, another thing that we want to pay attention that Mercury in Virgo is doing is that it's also creating an opposition, again, also a wide opposition to Saturn retrograde in Pisces. And Saturn retrograde in Pisces is really about facing an opposition, right? Coming face to face with responsibilities. Now, an opposition to Saturn in Pisces, it can mean the realization of what I have avoided to do or say, right? Because Mercury is involved. What conversations am I avoiding that are not making my current situation any easier? This opposition is looking for conversations to take place that are very much grounded in the material reality of what that relationship is experiencing. The earth energy really gives us with the opportunity to remind ourselves, when I look at my day-to-day, what is it asking of me? What is it asking of us, right? If there is an us in your household. and really moving at it, really moving towards what you're being called to pay attention to from a very practical perspective. Now, another thing that's happening here is that Mars in Cancer is the energy of something that is worth fighting for, right? My sense of home, my sense of safety, my sense of unconditional love, right? To be myself in a particular place, in a particular dynamic, in a particular relationship, in a chosen family. There's something there that it's worth fighting for, right? So Mars in Cancer, trining Saturn and Pisces is, we can do this. We can absolutely do this. It's going to take time to integrate, because Mars in Cancer in a lower expression can say, you either do this or you don't. And if you don't do it this way, then you don't love me. And I can see that happening because we have the North Node in Aries. And if we're not tapping into the higher expression of that, it can lean into hyper independence. And hyper independence is not necessarily a healthy expression of who we are. Hyper independence is a sign of trauma, because we believe that others don't have our best interests at heart, especially if that's what we've experienced our entire lives. But Cancer and Pisces, in a much more integrated expression, is this is worth fighting for. So in relationships especially, we have to remember that we are all learning to do things new in a different way than we were taught, and it is new for all of us. And the trine that it creates to Saturn in Pisces is saying this gets to come from a loving place, from a kind place, from a much softer place, right? All of those indicators of a much kinder expression of Cancer and Pisces. And Saturn is the commitment to that. We have to be mature about this. We have to be grown-ups about this. We have to be committed to this. We have to be committed to that outcome that we both want. We have to be committed to learning, to unlearning in order to learn. But we get to do it in a kind way. We get to do it in a way that feels regenerative to our soul. Because one of the things that we have to keep in mind, especially when Venus and Pluto are involved, there are a lot of triggers that are going to be activated with this. Every single time, there are a lot of deeply rooted triggers that are activated, usually from trauma. If there is any planet in the zodiac that represents trauma, is Pluto. And when it is activated by a personal planet like Venus, oh, you can rest assured our stuff is going to come up, right? And so when we have another personal planet like Mars, which is action, assertiveness, fight, courage, anger, connecting to a much more grounded expression like Saturn, especially via trine, we can remember we get to move through this slowly. Because whenever Saturn and Mars connect and we're tapping into a higher expression, this is a marathon, not a race. This is something that's going to take practice time and time again, that we have to trust that we will get better at it over time. We cannot expect perfection from one another. And when we look at, again, the other components that are at play here, especially Mercury and Libra, those two signs in the zodiac, I've noticed, are so concerned with perfection. So concerned with perfection. Virgo, because it's able to look at all of the little things and say, well, shouldn't it be this and shouldn't it be that? And Libra is about, trying to keep things at an even keel, trying not to disrupt. This isn't about that. There is already a disruption that is happening. And the disruption of the way we thought life was going to turn out is already happening. The way that we approach it, the way that we think about it, the way that we communicate about it is absolutely up to us. Now, another thing that Mercury in Virgo is doing is that it is creating a square to Jupiter in Gemini. Okay. Here we have two of Mercury signs at a square to one another at a 90-degree angle, which is an aspect of tension. But those aspects of tension are catalysts for change. If we have no tension, we have ease and flow. And while ease and flow are great, they create no change. They don't ask us to ask ourselves different questions. They don't make us change our mind or change our perspective. And so here we have Mercury and Virgo, which can also be indicative of this is the way I've known to do this. This is the order in which things need to be done. And the square to Jupiter and Gemini is challenging that and saying, well, says who? Because here's another option, and here's a different way, and here's a different perspective, and here's another article, and here's different information. If we are not mindful of that, we can get very overwhelmed with trying to figure this out. Be very mindful and remain grounded in that. If you are looking for the way to do things, the formula that is going to work, that's not the time right now. Because remember, that Mercury is still creating an opposition to Neptune and Pisces. And the most important thing that Mercury and Virgo is reminding us is day to day, taking things day to day, so that we are not overwhelmed by, I have to do things differently. And I realize that I have no other choice. One final thing that we have to really look at is the fact that the moon is in Gemini and it is creating almost an exact trine to the sun in Libra. So what this tells me that is that if over the next 3 months, we remain flexible, we keep an open mind, we are willing to have the conversations from our heart, right? Conversations, Gemini, from our heart, the moon, especially in our relationships, the sun in Libra. And we are willing to work through these things without deeming good or bad. It really is an invitation to learn from one another in a way that we haven't before. Then this is going to be a much more easeful 3 months. That is then going to take us into not just the Capricorn solstice, but what Mars is going to do in its retrograde. And Mars in its retrograde is going to oppose Pluto 3 different times. So that can be a bumping of the heads. That can be, but this is the way that I want it, but this is the way that it should be done. It can represent an overpowering of someone else. So if over the next 3 months, we're willing to remain open, be curious before we are judgmental, right? In our relationships. John Kim said that, by the way, not my line. John Kim, known as the angry therapist, he always says, be curious in your relationships before you are judgmental, right? Moon in Libra, Moon in Gemini, Sun in Libra. If we are open, if we are vulnerable, Gemini isn't necessarily the sign of vulnerability, but when we are willing to be open and communicate, there is a certain level of vulnerability there. We are both learning. I don't know how to do this, right? The relationship needs to look different. Maybe we need to go separate ways. Whatever it is for you, there is an openness and a flexibility that needs to take place because this is new for everybody. But one thing you cannot do is deny what your relationships or the relationship to your life is currently showing you. You are not aiming for perfection. You are not aiming to get it right. You are aiming to show up on a day-to-day basis, and you have to trust that that momentum, that commitment to yourself will pay off over time. May this be of service to you. So much love to you all. I will talk to you next week.